There we go. Looking at these two chapters, Hebrews 11 and 12, we'll start to see some parallels in the book of Revelation, such as people asking for rocks to fall on them. And I don't know why you would rather a rock fall on you than to repent. That doesn't make any sense to even a rational mind. But that shows you, if you allow the wicked lamp to burn inside of you and you don't restrain it, you don't allow the discipline of that wicked lamp until it's disciplined to a place where all that's shining in you, hopefully, is the seven spirits of Adonai, the holy menorah itself. And these two passages, or these two chapters, even talk about the role of discipline in the life of the believer. But, especially the judgments there in Hebrews 11:37, where it says, we can go back to 36. Others endured mockings and scourgings. Still others were delivered to bonds and imprisonment. Some were stoned. Some were sawn apart. Some died by the edge of the sword. Others wandered about, wearing sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, afflicted, and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They were like those who were lost in the desert and in the mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Thus, these all, having obtained a testimonial through the faith, did not receive the promise, because God from the beginning provided for our help, lest without us they should not be made perfect. Now that's very profound if we don't read the rest of it. If we only read those few verses and we look at how people of faith, and see, this is following on the heels of what we call the Hall of Faith, where he goes back to the beginning and he starts talking about it was by faith that Abel offered a better sacrifice. And he works through all these people of faith and talks about the hardships that they endured. And he gets here, down in the later verses of chapter 11, and he starts talking about being stoned, being sawn apart, the edge of the sword, wandering in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, afflicted, tormented. And he goes on actually to say, you know what, you people I'm writing to, you haven't suffered like that. You're people of faith, but compare your faith to these people I just mentioned in chapter 11 and the things that they endured. And it's never good to get into negative comparisons, but I think the point was made. A lot of times we get into complaining, which we're not going to do the Torah portion tonight, but if you've looked over the Torah portion, it's about the 12 spies. And instead of saying, we can, they said we can't. When all the evidence up to that point pointed to, we can, because it's not really us. We get that. He said he picked us because we were just a puny people. Right? So he didn't pick you because of your great scholarly skills. He didn't pick you because of your high IQ. He didn't pick you because you could bench press 300 pounds. That's not why he picks anyone. He picks who he picks because it demonstrates the glory of his strength intervening on behalf of the puny people that he picks. So we really have nothing to be proud of when he picked us because we're puny. And no, I can't say that again, at least not very fast. But we look at this Hall of Faith, and they were just puny people. They were average people, just like us, but they had above average faith. They said we can when they really wanted to say we can't. There's these points where we become discouraged, and it's because of where he's brought us from that we can say we can. In fact, all this good stuff, and we'll go into that phrase tomorrow about the people of the land, don't be afraid of them because they will be bread for us. We'll delve a little bit into what that might actually mean. But as we're looking at the faith of these people and we look at what they endured, and I'm sure that in every generation, these people reached points where they said, there's no good deed that goes unpunished. I've said that before. It doesn't matter how hard you try to do right, you try to do well, you try to be kind, you try to keep the commandments, you try to be patient, you try to be all these things, and all you really get is more trouble piled on top. But that's a 12 spies, or actually a 10 spy mentality that says, you know what, it looks overwhelming. But if I look at where he brought me from, then I know he will take me the next step. He doesn't drop us off in the desert, right? He guides us around. And in fact, as we'll look at the Torah portion tomorrow, he didn't just guide them with a pillar of cloud. It says that he covered them. He covered them with the shade of the cloud. And so all these people, it's not that they had all this faith in their own strength. He gave them, he met them. When you offer your faith, even if you say, Lord, forgive my unbelief, if it's just that incredible to you that he could break that bondage, that he could help you to overcome that obstacle. You know, it's funny because when Yeshua would ask somebody, do you want to be healed? Like say he asks a blind man, do you want to be healed? The blind person never asks for just one eye. When people get into that position of need, they got nothing left but faith. And as you look at these hardships, the people eventually had nothing left but faith. Imagine how Abraham felt. Sarah's over in Pharaoh's harem. He's helpless against Pharaoh. How is he going to get his wife back from Pharaoh and escape with his life? Well, all he really needs is faith, because it's going to be the Holy One who imposes a supernatural judgment upon the house of Pharaoh so that he's glad to let her go and give Abraham lots of stuff to leave. That's how the supernatural works. And these tortures that we go through, and compared to what they went through, it's pretty light. You know, people might make fun of us on Facebook, or, you know, they might sigh real big and roll their eyes when we say, I can't do that because it's Shabbat, or any number of things that we run into. But if people are just rolling their eyes at you and sighing real big and making catty comments on Facebook, we don't really want that stuck in Hebrews 11, do we? Just don't mention any eye roll I've ever put up with, because if I put it beside this, it's nothing. Some little catty comment on Facebook, I don't want it in Hebrews chapter 11. It doesn't measure up to these true giants of our faith. And they were willing to undergo the torture and the chastening because there was a discipline, a loving discipline that was involved in it. And the goal of this, he sums it up in verses 39 and 40, which relates directly to one of our seals tonight. He says, thus these all, having obtained a testimonial through the faith, did not receive the promise. And I think, okay, if the worst thing I've had to put up with is eye rolls and catty posts, or, you know, who knows what people say behind your back, but the great thing is it's behind your back. So hallelujah, right? You don't know. You don't have to hear about it. But there is nothing that I have endured as a believer that has ever been as severe as what these people went through. You know, probably the closest thing I could come through is, you know, in terms of being tested, is just not being able to have children. That's pretty much it. But had I lived in that day and time, do you understand the utter humiliation I would have had and the shame I would have had to have lived with? And today people don't much care, especially in the United States, because they're not big on children anyway. But in that day and time, it was a huge stigma. They thought you were cursed. They thought something was wrong with you. You had some hidden sin. Even though Jacob's really clear, he says, am I in the place of God? See, we think it's all a natural process, but Jacob tells us there is still a supernatural spark that has to occur for conception to occur. So even that, compared to everything else I'm reading, it's just a light affliction. But what binds me together with these giants of faith that I don't deserve to stand next to? It's because we are one with them. The preparation that we have gone through, whatever suffering he assigned to us in our generation, in our lifetime, whatever that thing was that we endured for the testimony. Remember, it says it's the people who have held on to their testimony. And it says it again in Revelation. People who hold on to their testimony through whatever trials and whatever discipline he afflicts upon them. It says, no matter what we go through, we don't receive the promise until that last person comes in. See, in verse 40, it says, because God from the beginning provided for our help, lest without us, they should not be made perfect. So the suffering of every believer until the last believer has completed the race, whatever affliction, whatever tribulation, whether it's the eye roll or being sawn in two, delivers from being sawn in two. I don't know how well I would hold up under that one. Whatever that suffering was we went through, it's what binds us together into one body. And see, without the eye rolls I've endured, it says they were not made perfect. Without the catty posts you get on your Facebook page when you write wonderful things about Shabbat and the feasts, these giants of faith are not made perfect. And so it gives us a great inspiration that when we endure these light afflictions, maybe being passed over for a promotion because we won't work on Shabbat, maybe not being given a raise because we always want to take off on these certain holidays, or we're too honest. We don't look the other way when somebody's stealing money or stealing time. Those sorts of things are what bring the body of Messiah to perfection. It's in the test that we join these other people. And so he goes on, just disregard the chapter separation in the New Testament the same way you do in the Old. It says, therefore, seeing we also are surrounded with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And let us look to Yeshua, who was the author and the perfecter of our faith, and who, instead of the joy which he could have had, endured the cross, suffered shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So he's the writer here is telling us that, I know the New Agers have something they call a collective soul. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Maybe they're getting it from this Hebraic tradition of our common suffering and our common races that we have to run as individual, binding us together as basically the birds of Messiah being collected into the bird nest. I'm not sure if it's the same thing or if it's something just completely new agey and weird, but the writer of Hebrews is telling us that this is what binds us together, a cloud of witnesses. So we've got a couple of clouds we can look at here. We can look at the cloud that the Israelites were under that protected them. But when we identify with people of faith, that also forms a cloud. And so in that case, can you see how the water in the cloud below would be able to mirror the water in the cloud above? Because that's all a cloud is, it's water. And so by using that metaphor of clouds, now we have a matching picture that we can put with the second day of creation. Because water was separated from water. You have the upper waters, you have the lower waters. What's going on with the lower waters? They should be mirroring the righteousness and the life of the waters in heaven. So if we take that same concept and we put it into two clouds, we know that the cloud that was the pillar that had the angel of the presence, of course that's holy, of course that's pure. But there's also this same cloud, it says in the Torah portion, that covers them, and Paul even mentions it in his writing. It says they were all under the cloud. So the Israelites had a cloud over the top of them to shield them, but they also, people of faith, form a cloud below. And that cloud should mirror the righteousness of the cloud, the shield of the cloud that covered the Israelites. So, and he goes on in verse 9 of chapter 12. He says, furthermore, if our fathers of flesh corrected us, and we respected them, which there's not a whole lot of correction that seems to go on in our culture. More and more I'm seeing children despising correction, and I'm seeing parents despising the correction that should be administered. I mean, just even, I guess it's the last year I taught high school was 92, and there's a huge change. Even in that short amount of time, it's as though parents a lot of times think their children won't like them if they correct them. I don't really get that mentality because mom didn't care if I liked her at all. She cared that I respected her. And once I respected her, then the lines were established. But I'm seeing more and more today. I mean, you just have to walk through a store to see the disrespect. And I'm not even sure we've got a generation now that knows what respect is. I made a comment to someone a few months ago. I'm like, that was really disrespectful to someone of my generation. You just don't say something like that. And she says, well, that wasn't disrespectful. And so I know she's got a completely different definition of what disrespect is as opposed to what I do. And I thought I was pretty average. But the writer of the Hebrews is saying this is the model, the respect that we have for our earthly fathers, our earthly mothers, our parents of flesh. If they corrected us and we respected them, how much more then should we willingly be under subjection to our spiritual father and live? For they only for a short while disciplined us as seemed good to them, but God corrects us for our advantage, that we might become partakers of his holiness. No discipline at the time is expected to be a thing of joy, but of sorrow. But in the end, it produces the fruits of peace and righteousness to those who are trained by it. Therefore, be courageous and strong. Right? And then he goes on and he gives some more instructions there, but he's connecting the idea of sometimes bad things happen to us, and it's a form of discipline. It's a form of correction. It's a way of turning us. Remember how I told you in biblical times, the shepherd didn't use the staff to turn the sheep. He used a slingshot. And if you've ever been hit with a slingshot, it hurts. And sometimes they might throw that stone out to the side to tell you to move this way. But if you actually get hit with a rock, it hurts. Make no doubt. You're willing to turn when you feel that. And this is what is going on in the book of Revelation. We have a discipline that's going on, and there will be two kinds of people. There were people who love the discipline. They endure the correction because we understand it's for our advantage. And it says that we might become partakers of his holiness. So if I'm awaiting the return of Messiah Yeshua, you know, they always say, never pray for patience because you're not going to like the result. You're going to end up having to be really, really patient. Be careful what you pray for. And yes, do be careful what you pray for. But in that preparation, we want the Spirit to come inside of us. We want that holy lamp inside of us to speak to us and gently correct us. Because when the Spirit gently corrects us, it's much easier to turn. Now, it still might be sorrowful. You still might endure some eye rolls. You still might endure some setbacks. But he says here, in a righteous person, when that discipline and correction comes, it's going to produce a fruit of peace and righteousness. Right? It's and the younger we learn these disciplines of our faith, the root of disciple and discipline are the same. People want to be disciples, but they don't want discipline. Well, you can't be a disciple if you don't have discipline. Because being a disciple, we have to take for granted that you don't already know the way to do it. So you're relying on someone else to disciple you or show you the way. And in that process, they're going to discipline you. Right? But there are some parts of us that are the hardest thing to discipline. And remember what we said about the hands of the tongue a couple of weeks ago? That the tongue actually has hands. Why is that important? Because it's not only a lying tongue, but it can be a hand, it can be a tongue that sheds innocent blood. And James even says the tongue can no man tame. It's an unruly evil, and it's full of deadly poison. He says we put bits in a horse's mouth to guide him in the direction he can go, or that we want him to go. We're training the horse with that discipline. But if you're trying to put Torah into the mouth of someone who doesn't want to be a disciple, they're just going to run off with all the equipment, basically. You have to go chase them down to get your stuff back. If you've ever chased a horse for a while, then you know what I'm talking about. The discipline, we have to be willing to take that yoke of the Torah upon us and be guided and to offer ourselves whatever those sacrifices might be. And it may be that he takes things away from you to discipline you. But it could also be that he adds more things to you. Maybe you're a little too footloose and you need some heavier burdens to hold, to ground you and keep you on the ground and keep you more concerned about practical things than running here and there. Maybe you've overburdened yourself. Maybe he will take some things out of your life that are an unnecessary burden, and they're interfering with your relationship with him. With these 7 seals, this is happening to the entire world now. It will show how it starts with the house of God, but then it gradually works its way outward, because remember, out of the 7 feasts, it is the 7th one that's called the Feast of the Nations. So we start with Passover, which is very specific to Israel. someone who doesn't somehow identify with Israel is not going to pay much attention to Passover. They'll settle for a counterfeit, they'll settle for a knockoff, but they're not going to be that interested in a Passover Seder. If they are, it's just sort of a passing thing. It's not something that's firmly taken root. Now, it can. That's why you invite people to the table. It can take root because we don't know what the Spirit's going to do in their hearts. But as we grow in the feast, eventually we end up at the seventh feast, which is the Feast of the Nations. And so the judgment works in the same way. Our house will be judged at Chametz at Pesach. So when do you think the righteous will come under the most severe testing? At the beginning or at the end? At the beginning. Why? He's trying to straighten everything up in your life. He says in verse 25 of chapter 12, it says, "Beware, therefore, lest you refuse him who speaks to you." And he's going back here to Sinai where the people didn't want to hear. They said, "Moses, you go listen and tell us what he said." Said, "Beware therefore lest you refuse him who speaks to you, for if they were not delivered who refused him who spoke with them on earth, much more can we not escape if we refuse him who speaks to us from heaven. He is the one whose voice shook the earth. But now he has promised, saying, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also heaven." And so you can see this parallelism in the book of Revelation. You can see stuff being initiated in the heavenlies, and then you can see the result on earth. For instance, an angel will take coals from the altar and he'll cast them down on the earth. And then it produces a result on earth, which goes back to our day 2 principle. It's a mirror principle. Whatever's being done in heaven is going to be replicated on earth. So we can choose on earth to replicate the righteousness of heaven, or we can be victims of our own rebellion. And as the judgment rolls out from the heavens, then it will be reflected in us on earth. So again, once more, I will shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Things that we don't completely understand will be happening in the heavenlies. There are dark, we would call them dark forces that are out there that we can't see. Baruch Hashem, we can't see them, because if we saw them, we'd probably be terrified. But he's going to take control of a lot of things. Just like in this Torah portion, it introduces 3 entities. It introduces the Nephilim. It introduces the Anakim, and I believe possibly the Rephaim. There were 3 different groups that I saw as I was reading it in Hebrew. And each of those different groups, depending on your source, represents a different point of rebellion. But, and we'll look at this tomorrow, not just those fallen creatures, but also the people groups that were mentioned by the spies, like the Amalekites and the Hittites and so forth. Each of those groups of people represent not just an adversary to Israel, they also represent accusers, right? And the adversary is an accuser, right? And so the people are hesitant to go in. Why? Because their accusers are multiplied. Now, no matter how many accusers you have of your poor behavior, have they been acting bad in the wilderness? Yeah, pretty bad. All right. They were like a bunch of 5-year-olds out in the wilderness. Right? They'd been living in slavery. They had never developed a free person's mentality. They were growing in their faith, so they were acting bad. Was there a multitude of adversaries and accusers who saw or witnessed or heard of their bad behavior? Sure. But did that mean that Adonai couldn't take them in and displace all those people ahead of them? Absolutely not. He'd been displacing stronger people all the way up to this point. But see, when they said the word Amalek, imagine, you remember what Amalek had done to them. That was when they lost, right? So if you've taken a severe loss from someone and someone mentions that name to you, it's going to pull up all those memories of failure. I really messed up that time, right? So they're bringing up a word, how? With the tongue. Remember, the tongue can no man tame. It's an unruly evil full of deadly poison. And they unleashed that poison and said, you can't do it. Remember Amalek? And see, when the Father says, remember Amalek, and so you'll go kill him. Go kill your adversary. Go kill your accuser. How do you kill your accuser? You repent. It's that simple. You repent and you quit doing it. And then they no longer have any power of accusation. They have no evidence to present to the heavenly court. Because the court will say, you see my servant Job, what are you going to accuse him of now? Right? So the accuser can actually go and petition for permission to make your life miserable. But when it comes to things like Amalek, let's say that Amalek's really just whipped your butt more than once, whatever your Amalek might be. If he continues to prevail, then he will continue to accuse you. But if you repent and say, you know what, I failed here, Father, forgive me, help me, and no matter how many times I might fall, I'm not planning to fall, I don't want to fall again, but if I do fall again, I'm going to repent again. Because when you repent, your accuser disappears. You take away the strength of Amalek, you take away the strength of the accuser. But what the spies do is evoke this memory of Amalek to discourage them and say, yeah, we really messed up there. We're just never going to overcome that sin. Yes, you are. Yes, you can. You absolutely can. That's what this hall of faith is all about. Every one of these people were told they couldn't, and they did. Not through their own power, but through faith. And so the Israelites fall short this week. Of course they can't. But the power that brought them that far could. They should have said, yes, we can. But instead they were shaken. And that's what he says. And these words, once more, signify the change of things which may be shaken, because they are made in order that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us hold fast that grace whereby we may serve and please God with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. Right? We could just skip straight from right there over into the 7 seals, because the writer of Hebrews has basically summarized what is happening, that he's going to shake everything that can be shaken. And if we are walking in the faith of the righteous, and as you go back through that list, these were not perfect people by any means. They all fell short in some way. But they prevailed by virtue of their faith and the righteousness they believed, and it was accounted to them as righteousness. You don't have to believe in your own righteousness. In fact, if you do believe in your own righteousness, you are going to fail for sure. But if you believe in his righteousness and Yeshua's righteousness, and you maintain that testimony, then all these things that are shaking in the book of Revelation, you're going to stand. Not because of your righteousness, but because of Yeshua's. That is your testimony that you're going to maintain. Revelation gives you the prescription. Maintain the testimony of Yeshua and the commandments of God. and you will stand when everything else is shaken. That's what it says on page 45 of the workbook, where I'm quoting Job 38, 12 through 24. And it says, have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and they stand forth like a garment. From the wicked, their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. All right, right there it says, from the wicked, their light is withheld. There are so many meanings in that one statement, and it's exciting. We know the Torah is a light, and the commandment is a lamp. If you continually refuse the light, if you're wicked, what does it say? Your light will be withheld. In other words, even that little bit that you had can be taken away from you. And it says they will stand forth like a garment. What is a garment? If we go back to the first Adam, before he sinned, his garment was made of light. He was wrapped in a light of obedience. He was wrapped in a light of the word. And that's what it says in Hebrews 11. It talks about how the worlds were framed. It says, through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen came to be from those which are not seen. So it's the word. The Torah is a light, the commandment is a lamp. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. These are all equivalent expressions. So what are your clothes? What garment will you put on during the tribulation that Revelation is describing? Well, if you're the wicked, it says your light will be withheld, and basically you're going to be naked. You'll have no garment. You'll have nothing to cover yourself with. And that's the whole theme of the fall feast. If you'll remember from Workbook 1, the whole theme of the fall feast is coverings. Coverings, 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 coverings. All the way over to the Sukkah. When we go over to the fall side of the menorah, we got more separation over in the spring side. But over in the fall side, we've got coverings. Why? Because he's going to separate you in order to gather you to like kind and like mind. When he gathers you to like kind and like mind, when the faith of all these great people is perfected, when the last righteous person comes in, it's at that point that the body of Messiah is complete and entire. It's now perfect. And that great cloud of witnesses, we can start to see why, in the fall, it starts talking about clouds and coverings. In fact, the Sukkot of the Israelites were called Sukkot of Glory because they were in clouds. You've got the clouds of the Rosh Hashanah being called together in the clouds, being caught up together in the clouds. You've got the covering of the clouds of incense at Yom Kippur. You've got the covering of the changes of the garments of the high priest on Yom Kippur. You've got the coverings of the consecration oil and the coverings of the blood at Sukkot. You've got the coverings and the clouds at Sukkot of glory. So that which was separated in the spring, remember that's why I said he starts with his own house. He's going to start at Passover looking for chametz in the heart. If he finds chametz in your heart, give it up. Let it go. You don't need it. Whatever that thing is, if there's anything you're still holding on to at Passover, let it go. Why? Because he's trying to pull you away from the wicked. Remember how it was with Korah, where basically it's like, stand back from them? All right. So through this discipline, he's separating you from the wicked, because their light is going to be withheld. He will not withhold your light, because your light is the light of Shabbat. That is the light that sets the tone for every other day of the week. And it's culminated in the light of Shabbat. See, it says in Egypt, the Israelites had light in all their dwellings. Well, how can we understand that? If you light your Shabbat lights when the rest of the world is in darkness, at the conclusion of the sixth seal, you will have light in your dwelling. You will have a garment of light. But from the wicked, it says their light is withheld. It says, have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? Again, he's using separation here. I'm trying to separate those who are children of light from those who are children of darkness. So don't despise the discipline. It improves your garment. He says that you may take it to its territory and you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Have you entered the storehouses of snow? Now remember, snow is solidified water. Just like we're talking about a cloud is composed of water, it's the same thing with snow. It's just a different, I should remember that word from physical science class, solid, liquid, and what's the other one? Gas. Okay. So with water, we have the liquid, but we also have the solid that we would call snow. Or he says, have you seen the storehouses of hail? Hail, again, it's going to be solidified water. How did judgment come in the time of Noah? Liquid water. But we also know in the Egyptian plagues that the hail, the solidified water, was also fire. The hail was on fire. So was it water or was it fire? Yes, judgment can come either way. It can come through water, it can come through fire, or he'll just stick them together and blow your mind, which is what he did in Egypt. He says, have you entered the storehouses of snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which remember also had brimstone, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle? Where is the way that the light is divided, or the east wind scattered on the earth? So as we look at that one passage in context, you realize that he's associating it with something that changes like clay under a seal. As you press that ring in, something gets pressed in and something else stands out. Something is going to be exposed. One thing is going to become more concealed. The righteous become more concealed. Why? They're concealed in a cloud. But that cloud is a great cloud of witnesses as to Yeshua's righteousness. And again, don't see that cloud as being way up past Mars or somewhere. Remember, the cloud was right over them. And they were right under it. So we're not talking, of course, we're also talking in spiritual things. So to say it was here, it was there is halfway pointless. But don't think of it as something that's going to occur where you're floating on a cloud, in another universe. We're still very much a part of this earth. And so he's going to divide the wicked from the righteous. And the wicked, it says, are going to stand forth. And then he says, I'm going to just shake it like a garment. And it's the wicked that are going to be shaken out of it. It's the righteous who are going to be concealed. Okay, so we went over before, how's our time? Just got 15 minutes. We've gone over the Aleph seal. Remember 1, the representation is the Hebrew letter Aleph. We looked at the white horse. where he says, "And I saw when the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, I heard one of the four living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, come." And how was the Torah given at Mount Sinai? With a voice of thunder, right? So anytime there's a judgment, then the person being judged needs to know the criteria. You might plead ignorance of the law in some cases, but that won't necessarily get you out of jail free, right? Because there is such a thing also as a conscience. If you didn't know the written letter of the law, but you knew better than to try to run over that bicyclist on the side of the road, you might say, well, I just don't remember which section of the law that was in. You can't convict me of killing somebody on the bicycle that really wanted to kill you instead. But anyway, I just got back from cycling. Big redneck truck. All right. But we're learning patience, right? Let patience have her perfect work. So anyway, what we're going to have here is the voice of thunder, the criteria according to which we're going to be judged. And for the ones who know, that's why I say he starts with the house of God. If you know the Torah, are you getting yourself into big trouble? It could be. Because see, if you don't intend to live by it, and sincerity and truth, doesn't mean live in perfection, because you can't learn it all. Right? But it means you strive toward perfection and you trust in the righteousness of Yeshua to lead you each day in the Torah that you understand. He's not judging you yet by what you can't understand developmentally. When it comes to that thing, did you live according to your conscience? Did you live according to what you knew to do? That's what Yeshua said. You know, if you didn't understand, you wouldn't be guilty, but because you understand and you won't change anything, now you have sin. Right? He can deal with things we don't understand. That's what grace is for. But the more we learn the Torah, yes, the greater the blessings come. The greater the riches of the kingdom come with the study of the Torah, but also comes greater judgment. That's what James says. Not many of you should be teachers because it brings the greater judgment. And you have to weigh those words and measure those words before you pass them on to someone who might believe them and act on them. Then all of a sudden, you're not just responsible for misspeaking or misteaching. Now you're responsible for what that person has done who trusted you as a teacher. And they might turn around and teach it to someone else. How fast does stuff take off on the internet that's not true? So the standard of judgment is coming there with the voice of thunder, which was the Torah itself. And the voice says, come. I looked and behold, in fact, there's actually a Torah portion, bo, which means come. I looked and behold a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. And again, that bow we've talked about, it's the same as rainbow in Hebrew, keshed. So whether you're talking about the rainbow itself that you see in the sky, or you're talking about this bow that the white horse rider has that he can shoot arrows with, it's the same Hebrew word there. So what is the standard? It's going to be the spirit and the letter of the Torah. And you will be responsible for what you know. And if you're being irresponsible with what you know, then submit to the chastisement, submit to the discipline, repent, and move on, so that you can be accounted among those of faith who say, in my own strength, I can't do this, but in Yeshua's strength, I can. I believe I can. Then we've got that second horse, and I think we've already covered him. It says, when he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, come. And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, and was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. So that's very consistent with the bait. It's the second seal that would correspond to the letter bait, which means a house, but it represents the number 2. If you have 1, 1 is 1, but the second you make a 2, you have a division. And this writer does have a sword. It's up to him to make the division. What's the point of the division? Just like Job is prophesying here. Just like the writer of Hebrews is telling us about here, he has to separate the wicked from the righteous so that the righteous can be covered, so that they can be part of the great cloud of witnesses, and so the wicked can be shaken like, leaves out of a sheet under a tree. If you've ever hung your laundry out and got them full of leaves, or had a picnic and got pine straw all over them, basically it's just picking it up, and he's going to shake the wicked out. But he doesn't want to shake the righteous out with the wicked. So he's going to take peace from the earth. And again, the temptation will be to lose courage, to lose heart when we see peace taken from the earth. But again, it's part of the process. It's revealing who we are, just like a seal. Some things will be concealed, safe, protected. Doesn't mean they won't be uncomfortable. I'm pretty sure it was uncomfortable in the ark. I'm pretty sure it didn't smell that great. Nevertheless, they were protected while the real judgment was going on outside. And the third seal, it says, when he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, come, and I looked, and behold, a black horse. And remember, like I said last week, these are all colors of leprosy that you learn about in the book of Leviticus. You learn about the examination of the leper, because remember, the leper cannot remain inside, which we broke it down, I think, into 3 levels of the camp. But the leper cannot remain inside any of those levels. It's just like the lower garden, because leprosy was a spiritual condition. We think of it as a flesh condition. Well, it broke out in your flesh, but it originated at spiritual level. So if you were diagnosed with leprosy and there was no healing in you, then you had to be assigned a place outside of the perimeter of the camp. So if you think of those rivers of Eden in the circles and what was inside of them, it was the good gold, it was the bdellium. Remember basically the hidden manna that Yeshua talked about. It was the onyx stone, the shoham stone. It was a black stone that turned white. These are all priestly images. Actually, when you go back, like the bdellium and the badal, which was the priestly pants that separated and divided. So they cannot cross the outer boundary of that river. Remember, was the Pishon, but it's a burning river. And so a leper cannot pass. Remember, like the rich man and Lazarus, he could see, like there was an awareness. I don't say see because he didn't have eyes, but he had an awareness that Lazarus was over there and in a pretty nice place in Abraham's bosom. But he couldn't pass. There was a great gulf between them. And so it's the same thing with the leper. He could see into the camp. He had an awareness of the life going on in the camp, but he could never go over. Unless there was a supernatural healing. He could not cross over. So again, the black can also show the beginnings of healing. If you see a black hair arising in the leprosy, it's not like the white hair or the pale yellowish hair or the red, the swelling red that represented pride. So this color, the black horse, it says, he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And remember, the little thing at the top of the scale is called a shon in Hebrew, and it means a tongue. Or we say life and death, the power of life and death are in the tongue. And so the scales are there. It matters what you say. It says, and I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine. All right, last week we looked at a story about the 4 lepers and how there was, Elisha gave a prophecy like, tomorrow this is how much the barley will cost and this is how much the wheat will cost. We get a very similar statement here from the writer of the Black Horse. He's saying a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine. So we go right back here. Let's say this is the black horse, the 3rd horse that comes out with the 3rd seal. In the progression of the feasts, we have Passover, we have unleavened bread, and then we have the first fruits of the barley. Now in the rabbinic tradition, this section of the feast, beginning with Passover, is not concluded until you complete the counting of the Omer at Shavuot, which is the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So this black horse is in exactly the right position to make this statement. Because on this day, we offer the first fruits of the barley. And when this season is complete, then we will offer the first fruits of the wheat. And this is what he's talking about exactly. He says, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. But he says, do not damage the oil and the wine. When do you bring in oil and wine? Sukkot. At Sukkot, that's when you can start bringing in the oil and the wine. So he's saying this judgment is for this season. In fact, if we're looking at the black horse, I don't know if you can see that, maybe. If I look at the 3rd horse and I match him up chiastically with the 5th horse, or the 5th seal, because so we got the 3rd seal, we got the 5th seal. They would originate from the same head. So whatever this black horse is saying is going to have an impact not just on this right here, the 3rd seal, it's also going to have an impact on the 5th seal. And it's no coincidence that the 3rd and the 5th days are both resurrection days, right? Yeshua was resurrected on the 3rd day with a lot of the saints of old, but the greater resurrection of the body of Messiah that the writer of the Hebrews is talking about occurs on the 5th day, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And as we work through the seals, we're going to see that the 5th seal is screaming Feast of Trumpets. So that we'll understand that we are on a timetable, and that timetable is represented by this menorah. And if we want to keep up, if we want to understand what's happening in these seals, we need to know the divine appointments. We need to know the appointed times. Because if we're looking at the spring and we're looking as the white horse rides out, as the red horse rides out, as the black horse rides out, these are all judgments, and they're going to and fro through the earth, and they're seeking. And we've already talked about, well, what does the Spirit do when it's seeking? Well, it says it wants to show itself strong on behalf of those who love him. But for the wicked, it's like the death angel. In Egypt, the seeking results in death to the disobedient, to those who have not sealed their doors. How do you seal your door? Obedience and blood. Whose blood? The blood of the Lamb. So it'll be the same thing as we're looking in Revelation. one of the great pictures of Revelation is that of a lamb standing as if slain. Now, if that's not a knock in the side of the head to tell you to go back to the Exodus of Egypt, and if you have any fear at all about the lamb standing as if slain and the judgments of the seals, and you say, well, how do I protect myself in this day? You go back to the Exodus from Egypt and you find the lamb slain. Why was the lamb slain? To obey the commandment of Passover. So in our case, if we've accepted the blood of Yeshua, every Passover we apply that blood to our doorpost. Why? Because a doorpost, remember the 4, it represents authority. Just like the sun, the moon, and the stars on the 4th day were put in place to govern the seasons, the Moedim, right? So if you want to understand, and I learned this last Friday, I went to a writing conference, and they said when you're writing a book, your ending is your beginning. A lot of people struggle, they said, to write first pages and last pages. They seem to be the hardest things to write. And they said they're not hard at all. If you know your beginning, you know your ending. Or if you know your ending, you know your beginning. People identify with that. They love those bookends. They love those closures. Right? It works the same way in Revelation. What we're reading about at the end in Revelation, we already know from reading Bereshit. He already told us about the end at the beginning. He already told us about the rainbow around the throne. So we could understand the lower garden and the upper garden. So that we could understand the way that the rivers work. So that we could understand eventually the drying up of a river to lure in the kings of the east so that would be terrified, or so that we would understand he's about to destroy them like he destroyed Pharaoh's army, because we already read that story at the beginning. So if at the beginning he tells us that the 4th day, thematically, we're to understand that the 4th day represents authority and governing, then we get this 4th horse here. It says, when the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, come. I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name of Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a 4th. Okay, he's just doubled the intensity of the statement. Over a 4th of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now, if you've been studying your Torah portions, or you've studied the prophets, you've identified right there the 4 altar judgments. So he's not just hitting us on one side of the head with the 4 and the theme of authority or spiritual authority. He's also hitting us on the other side of the head with the theme of 4 and authority, even putting in there like a 4th of the earth. He's giving us a 4th and a fraction so that we will continue to focus on that number 4. Why? Because from the beginning, from day 4 of creation, you knew that it divided the light and the darkness, just like the first day. It did the same thing on the 4th day. What does Job say in his prophecy? Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? Which I have reserved for time of distress, which would be tribulation, Sarah, for the day of war and battle. Where is the way that the light is divided? All right, the light was divided on the 1st day and the 4th day. It's divided on the 1st day because, remember, it starts with the 4th day. Everything was hammered out of this piece of gold right here. So Where does that separation of light and darkness come from on day one? It comes from the one in the middle of the lampstand, Yeshua, the one with the authority. And so remember, it's the Lamb that's breaking the seal. Remember, he's the only one who had the authority. He was the only one who was worthy to break these 7 seals. So if we want to understand the authority of the Lamb, again, we go right back to the Passover from Egypt. And we learn how he gained that authority. See, he started the journey with the Israelites even before they understood him. That it was going to be the blood of Yeshua. All they had to do was symbolically kill a lamb and put physical blood on the doorpost. But it was Yeshua, the Lamb who was slain from when? The foundation of the world. It was his blood. It was his spirit, spiritual authority that was placed on that door. That was the authority of the Father. And that's what Yeshua, the Father's given me all authority. And so it was Yeshua standing at the door, just like John sees him in Revelation, a door standing open. Yeshua says, if I open it, nobody's going to close it. If I close it, nobody's going to open it. Why? Because he has all spiritual authority. And on this 4th seal, we can see the central message. The authority has been given to the Lamb to finally execute the judgments according to the criteria that was given at Sinai. And that's why we have to be so careful with the Torah, to be responsible, not to become proud, to be humble, to say, fix me. If there's any hypocrisy in me, if there's any unclean thing in me, help me to identify it and get it out of there. Because the 4 altar judgments are part of that authority that Yeshua has. And that's, as you look at that heavenly altar, and we will eventually in the workbook, as you look at these coals that are being thrown down to the earth, what's being thrown down there? The same 4 altar judgments that you read about in the Torah and that you read about in the prophets. To kill with the sword, to kill with famine, to kill with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Those 4 things haven't changed, neither the many things that they represent. So it's a sign of authority. And well, we've kind of run out of time. I'll try to wrap it up here. From Workbook 1, you'll remember that authority is associated with the number 4 because of its placement on the menorah, and that Judah's birth order was 4th. But he ends up being given the scepter. In fact, the reason we call the Creation Gospel the Creation Gospel is because of Nahum 1:15. It's the definition of the gospel that you never hear preached. Because it says, behold on the mountains the feet of him who brings good news. Wish our spies had kind of, linked up with this idea. Who announces peace. Celebrate your feasts, O Judah. Pay your vows, which you paid your vows at the feast, by the way. For never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is cut off completely. Now that is a packed statement. The good news, the gospel, is all tied up in celebrating the feasts. In fact, it says when Judah celebrates the feast and pays the vows, keeps his word, never again will the wicked one pass through you. He will be cut off completely. So you want to cut off the adversary? We all want to cut off our adversaries. We want to cut off our accusers. Well, the good news, the pattern for us is right here. It's addressed to Judah. It doesn't mean that nobody else can. It says that the responsibility, the authority is being given into Judah's hand as the pattern to follow. Judah fourth in birth order, but preeminent in royalty. He's the lawgiver. Yeshua coming from the tribe of Judah. And it is through Judah and the Jew, Yeshua, that the wicked one is going to be cut off from Israel. It says he will no more pass through you. He will be cut off completely. So in our effort to cut off the wicked one from us, that he will quit passing through, that we will quit giving him reasons to accuse us before the Father, that we'll quit wearing Yeshua out as our advocate. And I'm sure he goes to the Father's like, guess who? And guess what they did again? We don't want to put him through that. We don't want to crucify him afresh. We don't want to trample underfoot the blood of Messiah Yeshua. He gives us grace. We don't want to take that lightly. And we do want to cut off the accuser. We cut him off by repenting and by keeping the feast. And that's the great thing about the feast. Every spiritual principle we need to learn, we learn by doing the feasts. If we're engaging them with a sincere heart, now we can do them hypocritically or carelessly, and we're not going to learn those lessons. But he gives that obligation to Judah to pave the way here. Show the people how to do it. Show them how to celebrate the feast, because the goal here in the feast is equally spiritual as it is physical. And in Genesis 49, 8 through 10, it says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Right? So as we look at this pale horse riding out with the opening of the fourth seal, which is the Dalet seal, the door seal, because the door, remember, has four corners to it. The primary thing we're looking for as that seal opens is the exercise of authority. The exercise of the authority of the Lamb who was slain, but who is also the Lion of Judah. Those two aspects. And in this particular prophecy, the lion will actually destroy his prey. He says, from the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion who dares rouse him up. He is going to be a conquering lion. He's going to be a royal lion. Not just the lamb, it was the slaying part that gave him the authority of the lion, if that makes sense. And that's what I want us to get out of this tonight, is that it is our slaying that gives us spiritual authority. So you can run around binding and loosing and taking authority over every demon from hell that you want to. But if you're doing it without that humility of spirit, if you're doing it without obedience to the things that you do know to do, if you're trampling underfoot Yeshua's blood and his grace and taking advantage of that, then you really don't have any right to go around binding and loosing anything, because you don't have any spiritual authority. And if those demons don't turn around and chase you down and beat you up and kill you, it is only by the grace of Yeshua that they don't do it. It starts with being a lamb. We have to be a lamb. And we have to be content with being a lamb, because that destroys the power of the accuser. It's when we think we're a lion too soon that the thing that we thought we were preying upon begins preying upon us. Why? Because we gave him authority. pride, all of these examinations of the leper, the things that they're actually looking for, such as pride, that's what gives the accuser authority over you. That's what gives the adversary power over you. Sins of the tongue, gossip, makes leprosy happen. Sins of pride make leprosy happen. It really does boil down to inappropriate use of the tongue. If you look at that wicked lamp, inappropriate use of the tongue and pride. It starts with a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, and remember the tongue has hands. A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run quickly to evil. And then before you know it, you're a false witness breathing out lies. You can't keep the testimony of Yeshua because you have a different testimony. And it's the only thing you know how to exhale. So it's actually deeper in the terms of the examination for leprosy. But if you remember only two things, if you say, I don't want to be a leper, I don't want to be outside the camp, I want to be inside the camp, I want to be in this great cloud of witnesses, I want to suffer my eye rolls, I want to suffer my loss of promotion, missing out on things because I won't do things on Shabbat, or because I give priority to the feasts in my scheduling, or I do value the commandments and honesty and all of those things. And I try my best not to live them in a hypocritical way. Humility and watching your tongue. If you can do just those two things, you can boil everything about the leper down to really those two things, because they will lead to idolatry. They will lead to so many other things, because you will feel a sense of entitlement. If you're proud, then you're entitled to go out and have prostitutes. Then you're entitled to go out and steal from people. Then you're entitled to go out and gossip about people when we have no entitlement whatsoever. We have to become the lamb. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, sacrifice yourself like a lamb for your faith. And in due time, you bear the good news. You bear the gospel. Keep your feast. Celebrate your feast, O Judah. Recognize the spiritual authority of his word. Pay your vows. Do what your tongue says. If your tongue says it, do it and perform it to your own hurt. And it says, for never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is cut off completely. Good news with your mouth, and a completely self-sacrificed heart. And when we get to this altar with the fifth seal, it all makes sense. At that point, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? That will kind of drop into place. But we can't be like Jonah, who basically went and preached the good news to Nineveh and then went outside the city hoping that God would kill him anyway. We're going to have to grow some shepherds' hearts. You know, if you don't do Torah, you're just going to get burned up in the tribulation. If you don't keep Shabbat, you're just going to get burned up in the tribulation. You take on the good news and let Yeshua worry about who gets burned up in the tribulation. He's more than capable, but what he's calling for us to be is lambs. Right? Wise as serpents, but as gentle as a lamb, because that's what he was. He was the aloof, the gentle lamb.